A special thanks to both sponsors of today's webcast, Salto Systems and Eagle Eye Networks. We appreciate their support of this facilities net webcast. Before we get started with today's event, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. We do encourage audience questions throughout the webcast. To submit questions, please navigate to the Q&A Ask Questions module at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions at any time. If you'd like a copy of today's presentation slides, they can be downloaded from the related content module on your screen. To successfully earn 0.1 CEUs, you must watch 40 minutes or more of the webcast. You can download your certificate at the completion of the webcast in the Earn Certification module. Today's webcast will also be archived at facilitiesnet.com/webcasts. Today's webcast learning objectives include identifying and assessing common physical security vulnerabilities, evaluating practical and cost-effective access control, and exploring modern access control technologies and integration strategies. Now let's learn more about our presenter. Matthew Harper is the Senior Technology Consultant and Registered Communication Distribution Designer with Jensen Hughes. Matthew has over 30 years of experience in all aspects of the consultation project cycle. Titles have included inspector, estimator, project manager, and designer for all technology systems related to low voltage applications. He maintains knowledge of relevant technology through involvement with BICSI, AITP, IEEE, and ASIS. Matt's project experience extends to industrial, commercial, and residential deployments of low voltage systems with full integration and intuitive control applications, from the conceptual phase to final commissioning of systems for clients around the world. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matthew.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay, next slide. So the purpose of this is the value of a risk assessment and the impact on designing security. All of our design focuses at Jensen Hughes start with an assessment of need. It's a collaborative process, so we want to make sure the end user's voice is heard. Next slide.
If you want to, Matt, you should be able to advance yourself if you're seeing that next slide button.
Yeah,
Otherwise, I can do it too. But okay.
No. I see
we can
that.
hear
Thank you.
We can hear you well. Thanks.
Excellent. So Jensen Hughes has a global reach, but a local presence. What that means is, our clients want to make sure that they have regional subject matter experts who understand locally the challenges to deploying security design. Our global reach, we have offices essentially around the world: North America, Europe, Middle East, Asia, and Pacifica. What are our purpose and principles? Ultimately, our company is made up of subject matter experts. We have an amazing bullpen of engineers, ex-law enforcement, Secret Service, special forces from our military. It's an amazing group of subject matter experts. So when we present the focus of a assessment, we want to make sure that we have those right people to plug in that best represent the collective experience. Clients, primarily our clients are repeat customers. We see an immense value in that. It's a testament to our client care. Those relationships, we not only want to make sure we're an active partner, but we want to make sure that we're delivering on their needs. The industry itself, we work with manufacturers, we work with contractors, but really we view ourselves as the voice of the end user. Your facilities operations, your security directors, we want to make sure that they have the subject matter expertise to interact with contractors and manufacturers towards delivering the best possible system or group of systems as it relates to security. Jensen Hughes is known in the industry for maintaining that training and expertise through, continuing education, manufacturer interaction, but more importantly, documenting past efforts, being able to go back and look through the different vertical markets of where we have done good work and provided satisfaction to our clients. So what is a subject matter skill set for this type of effort? A technology generalist is someone that's able to not only focus in on surveillance, access control, and intrusion, which are essentially the three primary security technology deployments, but we want also to be able to take into effect network technology, your telecommunications, your IT infrastructure, the idea that any security deployment could potentially include intercom and paging, blue phone capability, mass notification. Those are all things that a generalist needs to be able to navigate and, more importantly, present back to the assessment as it relates to threat and vulnerability. As a security designer, we focus in on integration. What we're deploying needs to be intuitive to the client. The manufacturers have done, as it relates to emerging technologies, the manufacturers have done an excellent job bridging what has been, in the last few decades, a difficult obstacle to overcome, which is a truly integrated platform. Construction experience represents our ability to bridge the end user and their needs, which really renders down to features and operational capabilities. We have to be able to bridge that with the contractor who's deploying the system. Our construction experience as it relates to security risk requires us to be able to demonstrate that. I'm sorry, there's a question. Are you also going to cover HAZOP and risk? I am not. I'm going to touch on it, but not specifically. No, this is assessment versus design is the focus of this. But I'll be glad to take your questions after the presentation. Back to construction experience. Again, we want to be able to bridge the end user's need for features and demonstrate that to a contractor so they can deploy the system as it relates to wiring diagrams, mounting details, that granular presentation back to a construction team on precisely how to deploy these systems with best industry practice. And that's demonstrated through a construction level set of drawings, as well as a specification and overall standard for that approach. Then finally, inspection track record. What that represents, I have a history background. I was a technology inspector for the UC college system in California. And really what that is adherence to a documented standard for the quality of the install. As an example, we're looking at water retention barriers as it relates to building penetrations. We're looking at future-proofing wiring fill ratios in those conduits so that is a potentially scalable system. We want to make sure that the drawing set, if it was not engineered internally, we would want to make sure that drawing set is in alignment with our standards. So I think that's an extremely important aspect. You'll find that with these security deployments, it's one thing to demonstrate a design to the contractor, but you really want to look at final installation, a punch walk, a punch list. You want to go through a QA/QC process during rough-in. We want to make sure that all those subject matter skill sets are present during our assessment. So our client base is pretty much all market verticals. I'm just going to touch on this lightly. I think the important thing to get out of this is that this is not a cookie cut process. A school in Oakland is different than maybe a school in Maine. Stadiums, as an example, the new Oakland A's stadium, you have a Las Vegas environment versus a typical city environment. So as you can imagine, those approaches, we definitely draw off past experience, but we really got to look at the environment individually as we do these assessments. Continuing with that, you see here that, pretty much all vertical markets, I would say healthcare being a critical one. We understand that in most situations where we're providing a security assessment, you've got an active project area. So you're taking into consideration infectious control, things like that as you're looking at potential budgetary efforts. Heavy industry, you're looking at a more of a hardened approach as it relates to the environment. But essentially, the client base demonstrates the experience, but really we want to take that individual project and provide a dedicated focus. So why are we here? What is a risk assessment overview? Well, the purpose is to initiate and determine the deployment of potential additional security features. And those, overall labeled as physical security, it's not just technology. We're looking at bollards. We're looking at fencing. We're looking at reinforced windows and doors, whether it's the deployment of ballistic glazing or other features. Speaking of features, we focus more on the feature, less on dedicated manufacturer. We want to take into effect existing manufacturers. We want to leverage those manufacturers that are already in place, especially as it relates to expanding on features and emerging technologies. We're there to gather intelligence. That intelligence, I mentioned earlier, it's a collaborative approach. We conduct interviews with stakeholders. Who those stakeholders are? It's facilities, operations, director of security, his team or her team, IT. IT is a big one, and in a lot of instances, they are somebody that we have to include and remind the client of their value. In most cases, especially with today's technologies, network connectivity is the process, specifically for surveillance and growing in the access control sector. So the idea that we are coordinating with them and potentially sharing distribution frames, we want to make sure their voice is heard as well. Our overall, why are we here, is to increase situational awareness. In many cases, I run into situations where they have a robust security technology deployment. They have camera coverage. They have access control. But what's observed is a lack of standard. Doors propped open. Well, it's hot today, so we disengaged those systems. That zone is turned off. So that situational awareness and adherence to a standard is extremely important. And more importantly, we want to present that to the client as something that needs to be focused on, which immediately leads, of course, to improved decision making. I would say the biggest hole in our observations, and this crosses industry platforms, is a lack of a documented standard. So really, we want to champion the formation of that document. And that's not just how we deploy systems, but how we operate those systems and what efforts are being made to avoid what I would call tribal knowledge. Somebody is trained extensively when a product is launched, and then that person has moved on and that knowledge is lost. So we definitely want to see that type of improvement in decision making. Overall, as I mentioned, an approach with consensus. Any type of risk assessment report, I want to be able to have consensus with the client, the end user, on what we're delivering. So, typically it's a draft. I encourage my clients to redline that comment, expand on certain areas that they're concerned with, really provide that end user with a voice during this assessment. There are situations, of course, where I guess I would say uncomfortable information is demonstrated. But in many cases, it has to be demonstrated. And, we have a willingness to talk through those issues as they come up. So our focus is on the risk assessment. We know why we're here, but what are we focused on? So clearly in a remodel or an expansion, we're looking at existing efforts. Surveillance, access control, and intrusion, one of the first things a client will remind me of is we have over 150 cameras. And I wouldn't say it's boastful, but it's presented as a robust security posture. And my opinion of that is, okay, well, what are we doing with those cameras? What features? How are you creating this more secure environment? Are you monitoring them? More often than not, they are not. It is a forensic effort. They essentially are recording an event, and then they are processing that and potentially providing it to law enforcement. Monitoring of said cameras is a difficult and extensive process that really is only demonstrated to my satisfaction in either a casino environment or in corrections. And what I mean by that is, are you able to real-time process 200 cameras and deliver on a real-time event with responsiveness? And typically that's a difficult accomplishment. Casinos are able to do it. Corrections are able to do it. But I think it's important that a end user understands what that surveillance system is for and how to best use it. In most cases, monitoring surveillance, and I can tell you with a casino, I do quite a bit of casino work, you're only looking at a 2-hour shift to be able to effectively monitor cameras on the individual side. And I can tell you that a typical operations center in a casino, there's perhaps a dozen surveillance experts monitoring those cameras. And again, it is a industry standard that that's only a 2-hour window. Most operation centers that I interact with maybe have 1 or 2 people in there, and those people have other jobs. Maybe they're doing paperwork. Maybe they are, as part of their 8-hour shift, they're in there monitoring cameras for 4. That is something that we want to be able to assess as it relates to existing efforts, as an example. Determination of stakeholders is another key item. We want to make sure everyone's voice is heard, and that includes obviously what the owner wants to present to us as important stakeholders, but we look for gaps in that. Like I mentioned earlier, information technology, they're holding that pathway of cable infrastructure. That is typically where your cameras land, and that is, like I said, emerging as an access control feature as well. Those areas are not typically shared. A distribution frame would then be triggered as a shared location. So those conversations have to be had early on as it relates to who are these stakeholders and how do we assure that each of them are able to present their concerns. The avoidance of single points of failure, what this means to me is how we're demonstrating a secure building and or site. As an example, a single point of failure might be a reception lobby. It might be a vestibule that a receptionist can't control. As an example, I would say in most office environments, that's your gatekeeper, that your receptionist. He or she is the first point of defense, and typically they are not trained to do some of the security-related requirements at that position, yet they are put in that role based on geography, placement of that entry into the building. So we want to look at those single points of failure, whether it's the ability to lock down those doors, staffing as it relates to scheduled events. If UPS is delivering, more than likely that receptionist will understand and expect that type of interaction. But we want to avoid that scenario where they are now face to face with a potential bad actor who has already breached what we consider that single point of failure at the main entry doors. We want to confirm and deny assumptions. This is another one. I have a recent example of a client was, it's a healthcare provider. They've got a underground parking garage. They have a vehicle arm gate, and the issue at hand is homeless are being found in the stairwells and the elevator lobbies on each floor. And there have been occasions where there's been actual break-ins into the actual healthcare center. So one of the assumptions that was presented early on was, that we have access control. We have a gate. Our site visit and our assessment essentially demonstrated that, yes, they have a vehicular gate, but it is left open 24/7. The equipment is defective, and it really needs to be replaced, so we just don't mess with it. The gate arm is the sole security feature at that vehicular gate, and as you can imagine, someone can simply walk around it. There is surveillance at that site, but again, you're not monitoring for real time. The idea typically is that that's a forensic issue. How did this person get in? Oh, there's our timestamp last night at 2 a.m. With that being said, and to confirm or deny assumptions, once we did our assessment, we determined that easily the elevator and stairwell lobbies could be put on an access control system with door position switches that will alert security of either a door prop open or a breach. But there was the environment where, are we seeding the parking garage? Are we abandoning the security of the parking garage to secure the building itself? And where that came about, and again, I'll cite the single point of failure, was that roll down automated vehicle gate. Do you want to repair that and make it part of your security profile, or are we seeding the parking garage and instead focusing on securing the building? So confirming or denying assumptions is a key, essential part of our assessment. And then, of course, a resilience reality check. I talked earlier about the ability not only to deploy these systems, but to enforce their use. In many cases, a reality check is required for that. Yes, you have excellent camera coverage, but that's not going to stop somebody from entering the building. It's merely going to record it. And yes, you have access control, but here are pictures of doors that have been propped open. Why is this allowed? And how is this allowed on a reporting feature at a graphic user interface? In many cases, and I brought up tribal knowledge earlier, I have entered Security Operations Center and have seen cascading alerts. And I've inquired, well, why are these not being resolved? Oh, the system, we have to disconnect and reset the system if it appreciates more alerts than we can handle. That's an absolute failure, and more importantly, a resilience reality. In the defense of the manufacturer, it is more than likely a situation where a warranty or service contract has not been upheld. And due to costs and annual budget requirements, those tend to be areas that are looked at as value engineered issues. I would say that when we present a resilience reality check, we want to make sure that, yes, we are an advocate of the end user, but we also want to appreciate the value of a security service relationship with the manufacturer and the potential integrators or service companies that require that information. So a risk assessment report and how this kind of cascades into its final vulnerability assessment. As I mentioned, it is a site visit. It starts with a site visit, whether it's a new build or an existing build. We want to visit the site. We want to look at how it's exploited as it relates to operational weaknesses. We want to look at staffing challenges, design flaws. Now, with a new build, a lot of our work, yes, we still potentially would visit the site, even if it's a footprint, because we want to look at that overall locality. But design flaws, we want to come in during conceptual design. And the reason we want to be part of that process is in floor plan determination and room layout, we see an absolute opportunity to make floor plan adjustments to provide a more robust security application. What I mean by that is oftentimes you're looking at, the architect is looking at the aesthetics and presentation, that welcoming environment. We want to provide a filter to that effort and allow for security common sense applications. And typically that's quantity of doors to areas, the ability to zone off areas. We want to make sure that we're not deploying unnecessary security technology based on what we consider design flaws. And then, of course, we want to conduct our interviews. End user interviews, end user stakeholder interviews specifically are extremely valuable to get a sense of what the end user is up against, what challenges they're up against. I did recently a distribution location, and fundamentally the security director's issue was, I have internal theft. And they did an excellent job demonstrating what those issues were. And the issues were, you had a large distribution warehouse with multiple roll-up gates. You had what I identified as an issue where employees were allowed to park right up adjacent to those roll-up gates. You had a standard or lack of standard documentation on the allowance of deploying those roll-up gates on a hot day. So you had those gates open with the understanding that, we're trying to cool off the actual plant areas. And then you had a lack really of surveillance in those areas. So some of the solutions were not what I would say deliberate technology. One of them was have your staff park in an area that can be located away from those roll-up doors, have it surveilled. And then the final recommendation was roll up industrial grade screens so that, yes, you could absolutely capture climate control in those areas, but you couldn't throw packages out or exchange packages or any of those scenarios. So essentially, interviews and design flaws allow that capability as it relates to risk assessment. So the components of a typical risk assessment report, obviously threats and vulnerabilities. We want to categorize those. We also want to present scenarios that maybe they didn't consider. We do provide a comprehensive recommendation category for, our goal is not to just present those threats and vulnerabilities, but what are the solutions to those issues, or at least solutions to consider. With security technology, surveillance, access control, intrusion, we want that to be an integrated deployment. What that means to us is preferably a integrated deployment allows us to, or at least we want to present a one-pane approach, a graphic user interface that's intuitive, that allows an end user at a typical workstation to be able to assess based on that integrated platform. I can tell you that in the last 20 years, last 10 years, there's really been progress towards that integrated kind of one pane approach. I think surveillance and access control, I mentioned this earlier, I think surveillance and access control are integrated to a level where I would describe if a door is breached, a camera will pick up immediately and prioritize that image. That's not what I would consider an emerging technology. I believe that's a tried and true technology at this time, and a true demonstration of that integrated process. Intrusion, it gets a little more complex. In many cases, intrusion relies on modules to express those efforts. If a glass break is triggered, does that necessarily allow for surveillance? There's a certain amount of human element there to make that happen in an integrated fashion. And I would say that you can deploy these systems, but as far as a easy to use one pane graphic interface, there requires a certain amount of effort. And then of course you have what I would call your add-ons, your extension systems, Wi-Fi. Great example of Wi-Fi. In a hotel environment recently, a client expressed a need to protect housekeeping. Now, we know there is duress capabilities out there. We know there is panic capabilities out there. But what we were looking for is a truly integrated platform, whereas someone in housekeeping feels in danger. They're on the 8th floor in room 215. They should be able to push a badge or engage a system to not only alert security of the duress, but also coordinate where that person is in the building. And we've had tremendous success using a Wi-Fi network grid to essentially triangulate that location for quick response. Same with Blue Phone. Clearly, Site Blue Phones have scaled back in their use based on people having smartphones that are able to do a similar situation, but we still recommend them in certain environments. And more importantly, that ability to respond to a Blue Phone situation, and more importantly, integrate surveillance in the usage of those phones is valuable. Key management, although not a technology per se, is a responsible effort to track and manage keys, and I always add it because it is a concern. And as far as legacy and approach, key management is a responsible means to keep track of those keys for a traditional lock and key environment. And then we spoke earlier about intercom and paging, and I want to expand on that and say mass notification. So those are valuable in many cases. Being able to provide that layer of safety to an end user via intercom paging rather than a face-to-face interaction is extremely valuable. Mass notification, as it aligns with fire life safety, is also a feature that we want to present. There is a complexity to that as it relates to local and regional fire code. But I would say that we've had tremendous success in deploying those systems. I think that the key thing to come out of this, of course, is we're presenting back to the client on means to secure their property, and I would not want to limit that to the surveillance, access, and intrusion process. So for me, that is an absolute inclusion of all potential low voltage systems that could assist in this environment. So project types. We talked a little bit about new construction, renovations, existing facilities, and I deliberately separate existing facilities versus renovations. And the reason for that is adds, moves, and changes in existing facilities are not typically an upgraded system. It's about identifying if that system that's in place is already scalable. We don't want to start from scratch if we can help it. We want to make sure that the systems that are already in place are exhausted before we recommend new systems. So the idea of a add, remove, and change, really we're looking at the scalability of that camera head-end structure or access control. How many more devices can we add? Are there any caps to additional? But then of course we look deeper into conduit pathways and your head-end space. Is there truly room in those areas to expand? And in most cases, they are not. So we have to consider potential migration to a new head-end location or additional conduit infrastructures. How we do that is I mentioned earlier, our construction background. We really want to see the viable deployment of scaling up these systems, or in some cases scaling down, with cameras being legacy on a coax system. 9 out of 10 times we're seeing a conduit infrastructure that's sized for coax, which, as I think most of you know, you're able to do so much more with category cabling and potential fiber optics. With renovations, there's opportunities for upgrade. They're similar to existing facilities, but again, I think it's important to separate those two. And then we look at surrounding area. A building supported in either a campus environment or a large parking area with parking structures or satellite buildings, we want to take that into consideration. We talked about camera deployment. Well, in a camera deployment, as an example, you have to stay within that category cable range to maintain that power over Ethernet, and more importantly, your warranty for your cable. It will not pass if it exceeds the distance that's required for that warranty. So then you're deploying potentially fiber optics. You're potentially deploying a hardened switch in an outdoor environment. Well, if we're providing fiber to that area, we're no longer getting power from the category cabling. So those issues need to be addressed, and I would say that surrounding area or site surveillance or access control potentially could require new distribution frames as part of that distribution, or more importantly, hardened distribution frames that could potentially include climate control, dust protection. You're dealing potentially with active equipment, so temperatures have to be assessed. Surrounding area is critical and in many cases missed. I talked about the parking garage and project where essentially they wanted to seed the garage and secure the building. We understand that, but you're not solving new scenarios. And then, of course, soft targets. A lot of our clientele are people. We are providing security assessments for CEOs. Recent news, you've had company CEOs that have been put in danger based on interaction in a security event. We do a lot of residential projects that reflect soft target protection. I talked earlier about reception as it relates to having staff be put in situations that are uncomfortable or dangerous. So soft targets are a project in themselves and worthy of adding to this conversation. So the ultimate value to the client is informed, risk-based decision-making by subject matter experts. I think there is a reliance from our clients of our experience, and we have to present that. Obviously, it starts with building design, but I think an important part of it is the investment. So many people are doing this assessment with a real concern on budget. And as most of you know, these are annual budgets, and these budgets have to be presented to management on what they're providing. You know, I want to add 30 cameras. You know, why? What are you using them for? And in many cases, that has to be presented. So when we look at investing in the physical hardening of the building and security technology, we want to take advantage of the idea that we're doing this assessment not under duress. And what I mean by that is a tragic event. I can tell you that most assessments are the first or second step after something has happened. And, you know, the purse strings are loosened. There seems to be a consensus for safety. I try to present that to a client early on, that we want to avoid that security event as a trigger for informed and risk-based decision-making, and the value of it. But I have to say, and it's not something I enjoy saying, but in many cases, it's due to a traumatic event. Staffing levels, we want to look at how staff are used. We look at guard tours. We look at the ability to manage that staff level to bring effectiveness in that particular environment. What is considered a busy time? What is considered a critical time? Staffing levels in a museum might be different than staffing levels, obviously, in a library or an office building. And I would add to that staffing level issue, what are staff capable of doing? I have a client who wants to create a baggage screening process. And the process included looking at queuing visitors. This is a museum. So as you can imagine, the museum opens at 8 a.m. People start lining up with their tickets to enter, and now they have to go through a screening process. So that screening process, not only are we looking at what's doing the screening, what kind of equipment is being used, what kind of physical staffing is being involved, but we want to know how that's going to be resolved. And in many cases, we recommend signage. We want visitors to be prepared for it before they are engaged in it. In most situations, security staffing are not qualified to deal with a firearm if it is uncovered during a bag search. So the idea is to prepare them for those scenarios. By prepare them, I mean the end user, to have a process that's a combination of training and common sense approach as it relates to signage to reduce that particular instance of a situation. I brought up earlier a standard, why a foundation for emergency and security planning is critical. A documented standard allows individual stakeholders to conform to parameters that have already been addressed and created. And then that segues, of course, into training itself. We want to make sure that training is not, tribal knowledge. Oh, you know, so-and-so sat in on that meeting at the beginning when we first put it in. He's no longer with the company. Now we don't understand how that system works. And they in those cases, they'd love to leverage the manufacturer or even the integrator for not supporting them. But there's a cost to that. There's a cost impact for not servicing your systems. The manufacturers do a great job of presenting it as a partnership, but it does come with a cost. And it is a difficult budgetary effort to maintain those, but there is a value to that long-term partnership with manufacturers and potential service integrators. So final thoughts, and then I'll take questions. I see some questions coming in. Final thoughts. The first thing about an assessment is collaboration. As I mentioned, yes, there is code and regulatory requirements for the deployment of security on a state, federal level, and then there might be standards that go into that amount of detail. But the collaboration with stakeholder allows us to champion the end user, and ultimately that is where our comfort level is. If I do a bit of fire life safety as well, and I can tell you it's an entirely different approach. It is, what is the occupancy code for that building? And then I deploy it. There is no collaboration with end user. They really, frankly, don't have a say in it. It is your authority having jurisdiction that's going to provide the parameters for that deployment, and we're going to execute on that deployment. So the idea that we would collaborate for a fire alarm system is not realistic. But security, there's a lot more flexibility there to make sure that we're championing the end user. How we champion that end user, we're focused on features and applications. I like to think I'm manufacturer agnostic. I'm really focused on capabilities. I do have favorites. I absolutely believe that there are several companies out there providing excellent platforms for integrated security. And as they come to mind, they're presented, but really it becomes a process of identifying features and applications for the client. Yes, I have a reception desk, but he's not sitting there all the time. Sometimes he's here. How can we have him monitor the front door without having to actually be at reception? All right, well, then you might consider a smartphone application, or we provide a additional workstation with the same features. Again, that's a end user convenience, and we want to make sure we use that process. I brought up earlier single user interface. What this represents to me is a workstation environment where I can see all of this incoming alerts and and process those alerts. I want to be able to see them come in and account for them and then dispatch accordingly. A single user interface, as I mentioned, we're getting there. I think surveillance and access control are there. Intrusion just seems to be lagging behind a little bit, but I think our future, as it relates to emerging technologies, I've seen some amazing things over the last couple of years. Again, that leads to integrated security application, and then the value of formal documentation of processes and sequence of operations. Sequence of operations is typically a fire life safety effort, but when we think of doors and we think of training and staff, we want that step-by-step, what happens when this happens effort. And it's typically presented not only in the standard, but we want to demonstrate that in our drawings as we bridge the end user's needs with what the contractor is going to have to deploy. What does that programming look like? What does access control or lockdown look like in these specific areas? We want to make sure that that sequence of operations is understood. It's going to reduce ultimately change orders or add services to resolve those issues. I can tell you that typically a door hardware collaborative process and an electrical contractor collaborative process is absolutely required. We want to make sure those drawings reference those other drawing sets, or more importantly, equipment schedules, so that we reduce scope overlap or scope gap. And then finally, a documented and archived training process. It could be on a key fob, a DVD, but we want that training process for these systems to be demonstrated for the long term, for the complete life cycle of the deployment. We don't want to lose features or functionality based on a lack of training. So that concludes my presentation today, and I'd love to take questions. I see a list of them. I can kind of go through those now. Go ahead.
So the first question is, does a risk assessment need to be conducted before considering the engineering aspects of access control systems?
I think so. I think I mentioned earlier about architectural situations. I mean, quantity of doors, rooms with doors on adjacent corridors. I think an overall quantity is at least on the conceptual side. I think it's important, but I feel that if we can look at the architectural drawings conceptual, we can reduce the potential for access control deployment. So to answer your question, yes, I do think there's a value of going through that process early on before we're determining the engineering aspects.
All right. And at what level does the single point of failure occur? The enterprise level, the substation level, or the communications level?
All three, really. Well, the single point of failure of each, I think each of them qualify for the potential single point of failure. So if you read that first one to me.
Yes. At what level does a single point of failure occur? The enterprise level, the substation level, or the communications level?
All right. So the enterprise level typically, and again, this is being resolved with emerging technology, but if there's a cap on that enterprise level on how many deployable devices you have, that's critical. On the substation level, it's typically, in my experience, it's a space issue. It's a real estate issue for how many wall-mounted panels and emergency power supply and circuiting, whether it's on a generator or any other uninterrupted power supplies. So that is a critical area that we want to investigate. And what was the final one? Forgive me.
The final one was the communications level.
We talked a little bit about the standards. You can deploy any type of system. If there is not a standard and I guess what we would say a culture to secure that building, that could be an issue. And hopefully that answers the question. Are we talking communication level as it talks about human resources, or are we talking about telecommunications?
I think they're talking about telecommunications.
Okay, so then we're looking at active equipment, really. Will the active equipment allow for port capacity to include those systems and still give a percentage of spare capability that IT wants to have? I think that's a big one as it relates to telecom.
All right, and is there an event timestamp? Is the exact time of the event logged when malware is detected?
It can be. We didn't talk about cybersecurity, but yes, there are cybersecurity software applications that can integrate and allow for that time stamping of malware detection. Absolutely. It's not a inclusive application. I talked about true integration, but several of the manufacturers are providing that in their applications, whereas you can leverage cyber security as part of the features.
All right, and what is the holistic approach to threats?
So, and Jensen Hughes champions the holistic approach, the ability to look at where we're at now and conform that security environment towards a more robust security profile. Our assessment drives that. I mentioned earlier, I've met with people and they open with a boast of 200 cameras. But I can tell you that how they're using those, and more importantly, the cost to keep those operational, I want to look at that, and then I want to be able to holistically present a better process towards creating that security. And it doesn't just include more devices. It includes maybe the reduction of devices. It includes perhaps documentation and staff training to resolve those issues and leverage existing systems for a better quality security posture.
All right, it looks like that will be our last question for today. Thanks again, Matthew, for all the great information. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience before we conclude today's event?
Oh, just that I would hope everyone would, especially on the operations side of our attendees today, I take advantage of an assessment. It's not a big cost impact, but the idea there is to really provide a sense of not only how you're using systems, but how you can leverage those systems for a better security posture. I think if you come out of that with the idea of an assessment, where potentially you're looking at a reserve study of not only where that's going to be now, but where is it going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And then more importantly, allowing an opportunity to use that assessment for budgetary goals, I think is a very valuable resource to facilities directors and security directors.
Great. Thanks again, Matthew. One last thank you goes out to our sponsors, Salto Systems and Eagle Eye Networks. Just a reminder to everyone, to receive your CEU certificate, you can download it from the Earn Certification module. Today's webcast will also be archived on facilitiesnet.com. And with that, I will conclude today's event. Thanks everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your day.